WWDC 2025 is only 1 week away now, and this year is going to be one of the most interesting WWDC events in the past few years. These past 2 years of WWDC had some very ambitious Apple announcements, but while this one doesn't look to be up to that level, it's still going to be filled with some of the biggest Apple software updates in history. So let's talk about what's coming. First, let's talk about one of the elephants in the room, the version numbers. Usually, if we're following the usual Apple version numbers, this year's OS releases would have been iOS 19, iPadOS 19, macOS 16, watchOS 12, tvOS 19, and visionOS 3. However, that's not the case this year. Apple will be changing the version numbers to match the year, and that means that every software platform will finally have the same version number now. So that means that we're getting iOS 26, iPadOS 26, macOS 26, watchOS 26, tvOS 26, and visionOS 26. But I've heard the same thing over and over again. Why 26 and not 25? Well, that's because these platforms will be released to the public in September, which means that for the majority of their lifespan, they'll be out in 2026. Not 2025. And not only that, but this follows what many car manufacturers do with their product naming. This will be a jarring change, but as you'll see here in a second, this is all intentional to unify these platforms together. The headliner for WWDC this year is Apple's Project Solarium. This is the internal codename for Apple's all-new redesign coming to all their software platforms. iOS 26, iPadOS 26, macOS 26, watchOS 26, tvOS 26, and even visionOS 26. This new redesign is directly inspired by visionOS with many glassy UI elements. It'll sort of bring back some depth into the iOS user experience. Ever since iOS 7, the iPhone user experience has been entirely focused on being flat, and the flat design has served us well for 12 years. But that's the thing, it's been 12 years. And sure, if you look at iOS 7 compared to iOS 18, the designs look very different, but not 12 years different. But this year, that'll all change. The new Solarium design is directly teased in all of Apple's invites for WWDC this year, and this new design has been corroborated by Mark Gurman and John Prosser. John even gave us a good look at what the design could look like based on internal builds of iOS 26, but keep in mind these builds were made back in April, not right now. One really cool touch will be that the glassy shimmer on many of the UI elements will actually shift based on how you hold your device, which is really cool, and sort of harkens back to iOS 6 with many of the metallic UI elements. Now, with this UI redesign, I have a little theory. This hasn't been confirmed by anyone else, I'm just throwing this out there. What if Apple names this new design? Hear me out. Since this new design is coming to all of Apple's platforms this year, I think it'd be much easier for Apple to name this new design just one individual marketing name for Apple to use across all of their platforms. Maybe they can call it Crystal Design or something, and they can just say iOS 26 now with Crystal Design, or macOS now with Crystal Design. Much easier than needing to say macOS now with the design from iOS 26. That's just a little theory of mine, and if any source corroborates this, or when Apple officially announces it on June 9th, let it be known that I was the first one that told you. Overall, Solarium will be a big step forward for consistency across all of Apple's platforms. Right now, all of Apple's platforms have some drastic differences from each other, specifically iOS and iPadOS when compared to macOS and especially visionOS. With Solarium, all of Apple's platforms will feel very consistent when going from one device to another. Next, let's talk more in depth about the individual platforms, starting with iOS 26. Not only is iOS getting the new Solarium redesign, Apple will be adding a variety of new features. There will be a new Apple Intelligence-powered battery optimization feature that'll help improve your device's battery life, along with a few more AI features we'll talk about here soon. There'll also be a new game store app designed to sell you games for your devices, including AAA games for newer iPhones. AirPods will be gaining a new live translation feature. RCS messaging will be upgraded to the latest UP 3.0 technology, which will allow for end-to-end encryption now. And in addition, there'll be a new Wi-Fi feature that allows you to sync details of public Wi-Fi networks across all of your Apple devices. Apple will also make it easier for you to transfer your eSIM from an iPhone to an Android phone. Apple will also be adding a variety of new accessibility features, which they already revealed. And if you want to see all of those, check out my last video. Next, iPadOS 26. Not only is iPadOS receiving the new Solarium redesign this year, it'll also be getting some highly requested desktop features to make the iPad more like a Mac. Specifically, it's getting major enhancements to multitasking. Right now, iPadOS features Stage Manager for window management, which has been met with a very mixed reception. But this year, the multitasking features of iPadOS will be directly inspired by macOS, making the iPad feel closer to a Mac than ever before. Combined with the new Solarium redesign, and iPadOS 26 will likely be one of the most exciting updates from WWDC this year. As for supported devices, every single iPad supported by iPadOS 18 will be getting iPadOS 26, except for one, the iPad 7th generation. This is actually one of the slowest devices supported by any of Apple's platforms in general, so it's no surprise why it's being dropped. Next, macOS 26. Just like all of Apple's other platforms, macOS will be jumping to 26. But of course, macOS needs a new California landmark name, and this year is no different. Mark Gurman has told us that Apple's crack product marketing team is apparently going for Lake Tahoe for the landmark for this year's macOS, likely indicating the name macOS Tahoe. Now, why Lake Tahoe in particular? Well, it's due to the new Solarium redesign this year. Lake Tahoe has beautiful reflective waters that mirror the surrounding landscape, which is fitting for a glassy-like redesign. But this new redesign means some Macs will be dropped this year. This news comes from Marco over at Apple Insider, who is incredibly accurate. He's saying that the 2017 iMac Pro, 2018 MacBook Pro and Mac Mini, 2019 iMac, and the early 2020 Intel MacBook Air will all be dropped with macOS 26 Tahoe. The minimum requirement for macOS 26 will now be the 2019 MacBook Pro and newer, late 2020 M1 MacBook Air and later, 2020 iMac and later, M1 Mac Mini and later, 2019 Mac Pro and later, and 2022 Mac Studio and later. Very interesting that the 2019 MacBook Pro will still be supported, as it has the same Intel 8th Gen Coffee Lake architecture as the 2018 models. Yet those are dropped this year, but these are still supported. Either way, this is just more proof that Apple will be killing off Intel Macs very fast. And this could very well be the last or one of the last years that Intel is supported at all. And for my fellow OpenCore fans out there, unfortunately, macOS 26 may not work with OpenCore Legacy Patcher, because the final Intel Mac without its T2 security chip, the 2019 iMac, is getting dropped this year. That was basically the last hope for OpenCore Legacy Patchers working with macOS Sequoia, and now that model is getting dropped. And unfortunately, it's virtually impossible to recreate the T2 chip in software. So not only is OpenCore Legacy Patcher dead with macOS Tahoe, any Hackintosh builds are also dead this year. So sorry to all of you tinkerers or people with these old Macs out there, this year will be the end for all of that. Next, visionOS 26. The name for this one will be very weird, given we're currently on visionOS 2. We're about to jump 24 generations ahead. Anyway, visionOS 26 is said to be a very feature-packed release for Apple Vision Pro, as this is technically the first big new update for the platform. Technically, visionOS 2 was the first big update, but that was in development before Vision Pro officially came out. visionOS 26, however, has been in development while Vision Pro has been out now. One of the big new features coming to visionOS 26 will be eye scrolling. Now, instead of needing to pinch and swipe with your hands, you can now just use your eyes to scroll now. In addition, Many more Apple apps will be rebuilt to be native on visionOS this year. This includes Calendar, Maps, Reminders, Podcasts, and even some iWork apps like Numbers and Pages. Right now, all of these apps just run the iPadOS version in visionOS. And this feature is confirmed by Apple themselves. Quick Path, or Swipe to Type, is being added to the keyboard in visionOS 26, according to their newsroom post about accessibility features a few weeks ago. And we should also expect the addition of PlayStation VR 2 controller support to visionOS as well, potentially signifying a major gaming push for the platform. Most interestingly, however, visionOS 26 will be getting some of the new elements of the new Solarium redesign. This is interesting as this is the platform that directly inspired the Solarium redesign, potentially signifying that the Solarium design features more than just visionOS-like design elements. Next, watchOS 26. watchOS already got some major changes back in 2023 with watchOS 10. With watchOS 26, however, it'll be getting the same Solarium redesign from all of Apple's other platforms this year as well. watchOS 26 will also be paving the way for hypertension detection on the Apple Watch Series 11 this year and satellite connectivity on the Apple Watch Ultra 3. We should also expect a new AI coaching feature in the Apple Health app and a few other major AI features. More on that later. As for supported devices, all watches supported by watchOS 11 should also support watchOS 26. That includes the Series 6 and newer, the second-gen Apple Watch SE and newer, and all models of the Apple Watch Ultra. Next, tvOS 26. tvOS has sort of been forgotten in Apple's range of 6 platforms now, but the last 2 major releases have had some of the biggest updates ever for the platform. And this year, it'll be getting the first major redesign since 2019 with the new Solarium design. As for other features, we don't really know much else about what's coming. However, Apple is rumored to be releasing their new Home Hub device as early as the end of this year, which will be powered by a new OS called HomeOS. This OS is directly derived from tvOS and will likely feature many of the new features from tvOS 26. Now, let's talk about the elephant in the room. Apple Intelligence. This past year, since the announcement of Apple Intelligence, has been a disaster both externally and even internally at Apple. The new features for Siri, like personal context understanding, on-screen awareness, and in-app actions, were all planned for iOS 18.4, but have now been delayed until likely iOS 26.4. And due to this delay of these already promised Siri features, one of the most ambitious Siri features planned for iOS 26 has now been delayed until likely iOS 27, a new LLM Siri, one that acts exactly like a chatbot like ChatGPT or Google Gemini. That's now been delayed to next year at the earliest, and we're not even sure if it will make the cut at all. Internally at Apple, things have been chaotic regarding Apple Intelligence, with Apple's head of AI and ML, John Giannandrea, or JG, and his team having their set of struggles, causing Craig Federighi to start his own smaller AI team within Apple, and Craig's team calling JG's team aimless. In fact, the demos of Siri shown last year at WWDC were not even seen by the Siri team beforehand. They saw it for the first time at the same time that we all saw it for the first time. All of those demos were fabricated and not running on real devices. This is a very crazy story, and if you want to know the full depths about it, I recommend watching Quinn of Snazzy Labs' video discussing this whole situation. The point is, this year at WWDC, Apple Intelligence will be taking a much-needed backseat. The only big change we're expecting is the addition of Google Gemini integration in Siri and writing tools, which is cool as I'm a big fan of Google Gemini, and we're expecting the addition of that new battery intelligence feature and that AI coaching service. And Apple will even allow you to use some Apple Intelligence features on the Apple Watch, thanks to your watch being paired with your iPhone. But other than that, there won't be much else added for Apple Intelligence. The bigger Apple Intelligence focus will be next year, not this year, as Apple probably does not want to be hit with 3 more lawsuits over false advertising. Now, internally at Apple, Mike Rockwell is now in charge of Siri development. Rockwell was the former head of the Vision products group at Apple, and he was apparently very annoyed that the Siri team cannot get good Siri integration working on the Vision Pro in time. So now Rockwell is taking over the Siri team, with Vision Pro development being led by Paul Med. Say what you will about Vision Pro, it's no denying that it's an engineering marvel, especially with the integration with visionOS. But again, we'll start seeing the effects of Rockwell's work on Siri starting next year, not this year. But long story short, don't expect too many big things with Apple Intelligence at this year's WWDC. So, that's what to expect from WWDC 2025. With all of this in mind, this is surely going to be a very interesting and exciting WWDC. Let me know what you're most excited for in the comments.